Warning: the contents of this podcast series often include sensitive subject matter and themes that might not be suitable for all viewers. Potentially triggering issues are discussed, and viewer discretion is advised.
If you or someone you care about are dealing with issues that impact their mental, emotional health, sexual health, or physical safety, please check out the resources linked in the bio or reach out to us directly. We are here to assist you toward emergency care and experts. Prioritize your well-being and sense of safety.
Hello, and welcome back to Shattered Foundations, Reconstructed Self, a podcast where we interview members of the deconstruction community to hear their stories and share them with the world. Here, we dive deeper into the process of deconstructing religion and then reconstructing yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you are moving forward in rebuilding your personal foundation. I am your host, Tahir Dixon, joined today by my one-of-a-kind co-host, Garnet. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well. So glad to be here now.
Yeah, glad to hear that and glad to have you, of course. Today's guest is another deconstruction community member who I was lucky enough to have met through the Deconstruction Junction Discord specifically. Our guest is a complete delight, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to get to know our guest better. Today, we are chatting with Omni Kaiser. So glad to have you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of
Thanks for having me.
course.
Before we chat with Omni, I want to take a moment to thank our listeners. Your support means so much to us. If this is your first time checking out our show, welcome. If you're listening, we hope there's something you'll take away with you from this episode. Make sure you like, share, comment, and click on that notifications bell so you are always up to date on the latest episode of Shattered Foundations. We release new episodes weekly. Okay, Omni. Where would you like to start in sharing your experiences with religion?
Yeah, so I guess a bit about me was, I grew up in the church at a very young age, and I was born in Oklahoma, so it's like very much in the Bible Belt. I don't know if that's technically the Bible Belt, isn't it, or at least close to it. And I remember probably the earliest memory I honestly had was giving my life to Christ at the age of 4. And I'm pretty confident it was the age of 4. And obviously you do it dozens of times because you got to make sure you get it right. And for me, there was no critical thinking involved, really. There was no like assessing the data. It was just, this is the absolute truth and you don't need to worry about it kind of thing. And I did remember like when I was growing up in the church, when I would look at the gospels and I would see like, okay, Jesus is telling the rich man, sell everything you have and come follow me. And seeing how Jesus would there's no like writings of him working, it's just him just going around being a rabbi, a minister kind of thing. I remember just thinking to myself, we have houses, we have our shelters, and we very much do the same stuff over and over again. We're not out there, doing miracles. It's like we very much almost rarely talk about Jesus. And I remember kind of thinking, well, on one hand, I was like, I don't know if I want to say anything about this, but on another, I was like, well, if I do say something, maybe people are going to be like, you better get out there and start preaching. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. I was a big introvert. So over time, one of the things that started to happen was I got into like a bit of like spiritual stuff where I was like, man, I just feel like there's like something here to this. And I felt like there's something I need to like take seriously about this and not just go to church and whatnot. And one of the things that pastors would kind of do, this started to happen around, I think Francis Chan came up with this. This was like early 2000s, where you started to see pastors say things like, don't just pray and give God all your list of to-do things for your requests for God to do. Just sit there in silence and let God speak, right? So it's like, oh, okay, this seems cool. Let's do that, right? And so I would just sit there and just see like what random thoughts would appear or whatnot. And I can't specifically map out exactly what happened, but over time, what I started to do was I would ask the Holy Ghost yes or no questions. And based on how I felt at the end, that would determine if it was a yes or no. So it's like, for example, if I asked a question and I had that, euphoric feeling you get when you're at church and you're raising your hands up and you're praising God, or you have the goosebumps, or you just have a good, like, euphoric feeling that something powerful is happening, I'd be like, okay, that meant a yes. And then if I had that feeling that you get that like, I don't know if I'm in a safe place or that this is just seems like a very bad environment. I'm going to get out of here. That meant a no, right?
Mhm.
Later on, I found out I could kind of manipulate my feelings to like feel and think that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I was like, oh, that must be like the Holy Ghost. Because when I would do that like dozens of times, and you start to have these beautiful moments that you count and you forget all the times where nothing happens or whatever, your brain starts to latch onto that and you think that must be the Holy Ghost. And so I started to develop basically like, oh, maybe this is how God interacts with us. That's what that looks like, kind of thing. Right. And so, because like anytime when you would read the Bible and, you kind of get this impression, I wouldn't go at it like forensically, like a scholar or anything, but I just was like, man, it just seems like their experiences were way more powerful than they are today. But maybe that's, and so I'd try to, maybe I would associate with that and connect that and be like, oh, that's what that probably is to a certain degree or whatever, right? Is, when you'd see a miracle or whatever, you'd ask God for help. Or, sometimes people would be like, God, if you're real, do this or that. And then you would hear the odd
Mhm.
chance that it happens. I never had anything necessarily like that, where I'd ask
Mm.
God, do this right now, and then the moment would happen kind of thing. But the experiences I did have, there were a couple off the top of my head. Like one was I was a counselor at a church camp, and it was during the worship session, and it's when it was a Protestant type of worship session, so you'll have people like raising their hands up, going to the front or whatever, doing all that stuff. And one of the things that I did was I gave my camper kid like a prophetic word that, oh, I see God doing this for you or whatever. Like him, I think I said that he was supposed to be a wrestler, and he's like, oh, right when I gave him that word, it was like he said his leg cramp went away right in that moment.
What?
Right? Yes,
Not a
yes.
cramp.
He had a leg
Eat a
cramp and it just
banana,
went
drink
away.
some water.
Yes,
No.
yes, exactly. You
That's
should do
funny.
that. Right? But anytime when you're in that moment where you got the music going on and you're like so focused on God, you've got that tunnel vision there.
Yeah.
Anything and everything is like, that must be God. That's God. That's
Right.
what God does. This is God. Right. And so, like, we were just tunnel visioned onto that and not, thinking pragmatically about that. And so we were, and everyone was like, wow, like Kevlar, that's amazing. And like, even I think the youth pastor had a word and we even cross referenced ours and we're like, oh, it's close
Wow.
enough. So it's like, that must have, clearly God is speaking through us, right? Because we never like
Mm.
premeditated this. And
Right,
then there was
right.
another time where I was at a church session and I saw this family. I never met them. And I just went up to them and I was like, I see, God gave me this picture of you, your family, and God's hand underneath and like had a force field around it to like protect you guys. And he immediately stood up and said, that's absolutely from God. And he expressed how he had this fear of unaliving from, his family tree had a lot of cancer or and heart attacks.
Mm.
And he was worried that was going to
Mm.
happen to him. And he even gave
Yeah.
a sermon 5, 10 years later about how I gave him a prophetic word and how that got him through a tough time.
Mm.
I was just like, it's funny as I look back on it now, but at the time it was like people would use this and say, Kevlar, you can hear from God. Don't have doubts that you're not hearing from the Holy Ghost. Because like we always have these moments where, maybe it doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, or maybe you thought it was supposed to happen like this and it never does work out. Or like one of the things I notice is like anytime when God told me to do something and I go out and do it, it never ends up happening the way you kind of get a rough draft in your head or whatever, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's always like this other weird thing and it's spontaneous and it seems rare. So that must have been God, or that must have been how he's doing it, or
Mm.
whatever. Anyways,
These prophetic visions you were having, if you will, looking back on it now, do you think like, oh wow, I must have been tapping into something, or do you think, wow, I was full of shit? Just out of
yeah,
curiosity.
I was full of shit.
Okay, okay,
I
okay.
don't want to say, yeah, in the time, I wouldn't have said I was full of shit. I
Right,
would
right,
say,
right.
yeah, like looking back at it though, I could see how I strung that up and how this all gets strung up together, right? But
Right.
when you're kind of like, you know, well, I would attend church services. There was like a prophetic conference that I went to where they would
Wow.
try to,
teach you. Yes.
I've attended a few prophetic conferences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Continue.
And they teach you how to give prophecies. They teach you how to
Yep.
touch into the Holy Ghost. They teach you how to
Mhm.
all of this stuff.
The
And
science. The
yeah,
science behind
I mean, they never use that word, but yeah, that's what they do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, looking back, I remember if you talk to like illusionists or magicians and you learn about cold readings and warm readings, right? And there was this one guy, he said anytime when he did this practice session with just a group of random people who were learning how to give cold readings, he said when you have the recipient who's listening for the cold reading and they're open to it, he's like, there's like
Mm-hmm.
an 86% chance success rate.
Mm.
And that's the chance if the person's like willing to, right? And so it's like the other, if they're not willing to, it's got to be really like spot on, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, you don't think about that, right? You just
Right.
are taught this book. You're taught, oh, and this is how this person's got an amazing spiritual experience that they're like, when I hear about these faith healers, I was hoodwinked on them from the get-go. When I heard about this, I was like, I always
Mm-hmm.
knew that God had to have been using it. We just have to go out there and God's going to move. And so when I would hear these stories, it made a lot of sense at the time.
That
But
it's that confirmation bias. You're seeing things through the lens that you want to see them through, and that you really, for all intent and purposes, that you're supposed to see things through, as a
yes.
Christian. You don't see it as like you could be taking the same class as somebody who wants to learn how to be a medium. I mean, let's be
Mhm.
real, it's the same thing, except
Yeah, no.
the way they
Mhm.
frame it is, no, this is learning how to use the gifts from God and how
Yeah.
God can talk through you and all that stuff.
Yeah, and like no one ever teaches you or pulls you aside and says, "Hey, we looked into this, assessed it, and we determined this to be true." They don't present it to you like it's a theory or a hypothesis. They say,
Right.
"This is capital T truth." And by the way, if you don't believe it, you're going to burn in hell for it. Right? So they just
Right.
Exactly.
you get the
Right.
threat side of things, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't
Mhm.
this humility or transparency or acknowledgement, "Oh, I could be wrong about this, but I'm
Mhm.
trusting God in all of this and all that, and I'm just presenting this information out there." It was like, no, this was absolute
It's
truth.
absolutes. Yep.
And
It's
there's no
always an
doubt. And if
absolute.
you had doubts, that must have been from Satan, is kind of how,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
they would
Exactly.
how they would teach,
And
right?
you'll be the one punished, right? The
Mm.
doubts come from Satan, but you don't be twisted.
Yes.
You're going to be the one that's punished.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because you
Yeah,
were weak.
exactly. You're even
Yes.
though you're being
Mm-hmm.
duped, you still take full responsibility, even though you had no idea of what you were doing. Like you
Right.
didn't know.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
was just going to say it's just like it's that same lesson that they teach you at the very start of the Bible. If you start right at the beginning, you have that lesson immediately. You will have doubts creep in or questions or things other than what I'm telling you that may come to your mind, but ignore it. And if you don't, then you get in trouble because you were too weak or you weren't strong enough in your faith or what have you. And so it's like Eve, we can sit and talk about how truly developed they would have been, mentally, but at the end of the day, if you don't have this concept just inherently of like right and wrong, then if you're being told something and in the context you're being fed it makes sense, then yeah, you go with it. And that's almost kind of what happened is like, and really too, the Satan or the serpent or whatever wasn't even the one lying. That's the other
yeah.
thing too, and it's just like, but then Eve was in the wrong and Eve was punished and so on and so forth. And it's
Mhm.
it's like it really is the broader idea of the whole Christian religion and like their fear being what they lead with, because it's harder to question things if you always have in the back of your mind like, but wait, what am I not trusting your reality? Like, what am I supposed to see as truth and what am I supposed to assume is the devil? And it's a whole model that it has, and it's right there right at the front of the book.
Yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
you're taught
That's a good
to
point.
like control those thoughts kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not taught to engage and try to understand further in your learning. You're taught
Right.
that is bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a very big moment. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Garnett, but like there was a huge debate that took place on YouTube like 10, 11 years ago between Ken Ham and Bill Nye. And they were debating at the Ark.
Oh.
Yeah, when the ark just opened. And there's this famous line that a lot of atheists have brought up where they asked, like at the end of the debate, one of the questions they asked, what if anything would change your mind? And Bill Nye goes, just one piece of evidence. Like if we had evidence that the stars that are millions of light years away only appeared that way and they're actually much closer, that's what I would need. Or if we had evidence that anything that would support the young earth hypothesis, then I would hop on. I would have no problems changing my mind. And Ken Ham goes, nothing would change my mind. And I remember at the time, as a Christian, I was like, yeah, Ken Ham's right. We can't budge on this. We have to, that was my mentality. It wasn't, let's try to get to truth as best we can. It was, this is it. And we can't even entertain anything else because that's Satan.
Yeah. I'll
Right.
hear nothing else about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
So
strongly can I hold to this tradition?
No matter what. Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So life goes on. And one of the things I had always kind of expected, as a Christian, again, I wasn't like your Billy Graham, I'm going to like convert everyone kind of thing. I was like your sixth string Christian. I would go on the trips, the missions trips. I would try to help people out. I would try to do my part to help people. I had the idea of like what the Bible says and all that. But I wasn't your superstar, like it, always kind of thing. And I'd always kind of had this expectation of God that, okay, I don't necessarily expect him to like give you riches or like a family or whatever, but I always kind of anticipated he's going to give me a fulfilled life, that if I just put God first in my life, like all this will be added on. I don't need to worry.
Yeah.
Right.
And, so one of the things I didn't realize I had growing up, I had ADHD. I didn't know that. And so school was very hard for me. It was extremely difficult. And I just thought this was normal. Like I'm just lazy is what I legitimately thought.
Yeah, that's
And so
common.
I had a hard time with it. And so there weren't a lot of economic opportunities that came my way. And so I would just be like pursuing God and doing my best. And anytime like I'd have a problem or whatever, it was very hard. I didn't know how to emotionally regulate myself at the time, or as good as I do now. And I would take things so personally and it would just be so difficult. And I still like I'm working on that stuff. Well, anyways, I eventually got recommended my friends recommended, oh, I should chat with this one girl. They were trying to hook us up to date. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? And, she brought this up to me. And I remember like tears went down my face out of relief because I always felt like something was off. But everyone around me was like, no, you're fine. No, you're fine. You're just thinking about it too much or whatever. You're just being lazy.
Okay, you mean
Yeah.
ADHD.
So it was a
Okay.
relief because I was like, wow, like I always thought something was off, but I just couldn't put my finger on it or anything. Right. And that was like a huge moment of relief for me that I'm like, wow, like I have, like,
Validation.
yeah, it was very appreciative in that moment. And I remember like thinking like, okay, that's kind of weird that like God didn't say anything about this, or, it seemed like everyone at church was like speaking against it, but whatever, like I'm not going to think too much about it. And as we were dating in the churches I would go to with her,
And
I
you were
would
how
continue.
old at this point?
I was mid-20s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was like, there was like a lady specifically where I told my girlfriend, I was like, oh, I think I need to give this lady a prophetic word. And she's like, yeah, go ahead. And I go up to this lady and I'm like, oh, I think God's telling me that your son, like something about your son or something. I can't remember specifically. And she goes, no, I don't have a son. I don't think this is from God or so. Or like, she's like, I don't know. And to me at the time, I was very confident that I was hearing from God like I had heard from other people. And this is where it was so normally like with other people, it's like, oh, maybe like this is what God means by this, or it was just blatantly wrong. And I remember thinking, okay, that's weird. I'm pretty confident I was hearing from God. I'm pretty confident I did everything right. I'm pretty confident. Normally, like I did understand the idea, I think later on, that thoughts in your brain, but I thought I had a good way of sifting that roughly. And it's hard to describe other than just the moment that you have. It's a distinct moment that you can't really put into words. And I thought I had that moment that, oh, this is a prophetic word from God. And it just didn't work. So I just chalked it up to, well, I guess I just wasn't hearing from God there,
But it
and I just put
was
that in the back of my brain.
Yeah, it was some
Right.
more dissonance at that point.
Yeah. So that's what I just chalked it up to. Well, then I had this vision that I shared with my girlfriend, and I was completely like not thinking when I wasn't thinking anything of it. I just gave it to her. And the vision was basically me walking out of this dark forest, and I see her at this like kind of small house, and a little baby boy run up to her and give her a hug. And she goes, Kevlar, that's gonna be our son.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what God told me his name is. And this is also what God told me our daughter's going to be. And so I just took this as, okay, God wants us to get married. This is like part of the plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
This is
so,
it.
yeah, this is it. I was like, okay, this is the mission. Anytime when I'm like, I'd always understood that God doesn't interact in my life all the time, but when he does, it's go time. It's like, you're a fireman or whatever, you're chilling at the place, and then when
At
the
the
fire
station.
alarm
Yeah.
goes, you go, right? This is it. So I was like, all right, no problem. And well, fast forward, we end up breaking up. And it
Yeah,
was
I was
good.
waiting for that. I was
Oh,
It
like,
was
oh
good. It
you
was
could
good
have
that
no.
we
predicted that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good that we broke up, but this was the thing that I know I was thinking, but again, I just put it in the back of my mind, where in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, this was like, I had understood when Jesus says in the Bible, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
I had always understood that to be where Peter had the free will to deny or not deny, but Peter's definitely going to deny Jesus. That's the way I understood that. It couldn't have been that Peter could have chosen otherwise. So when Jesus says, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times, I had understood that's going to happen, because if it doesn't happen, that would mean Jesus is a liar or a false prophet, right?
Right.
That's
Mhm.
my understanding of how God knows the future is we have this free will, yes, but God knows for 100% what we're going to do every minute, kind of thing.
So
So,
a contradiction, really, in
yeah,
essence, that
at the time,
you,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like another one of those apologetics, essentially, that you
It-
subscribe to. You're like, yeah, this works. I like this.
yes. Yeah. So it was like, I had understood, okay, Jesus gave a prophecy that this is going to happen in the future to Peter. And Peter, like, out of his free will, he's going to do that. Right. Yes, you could say he has free will, but Jesus knows what's going to happen. And so when I had thought, here I gave my girlfriend this vision, and she confirmed this is from God and we're going to get married. That meant that all things considered, out of our free will, we're going to get back together, or we're going to get married out of our free will.
Oh,
That's how I
okay.
understood that. So I knew, in my mind, I was like, okay, we have our free will. Yes. God gave us this future event, and this is going to happen. Right. And so again, at the time, I know that had been brewing in my brain, but I wasn't consciously thinking about it. Again, I had yet again chalked it up to, well, I guess I just wasn't hearing from God, is what I kind of
Right.
understood that. That's how I like kind of put that to the side there. So anyways, this is at the time now where COVID starts to happen. And
Mm.
during this time with COVID, people aren't working as much, they're staying at home. And I'd always like to every now and then like to see what do atheists like to cook up or whatever, because I would anytime when if you go back to 10, 15 years on what atheists would say on YouTube, it always was like a bunch of a-holes. It felt like they don't care about the truth. They just want to mock and make fun of you. So when I looked up specifically like new counter apologists, guys like Genetically Modified Skeptic or Apologia, or these were guys that weren't mean, and they would just kind of give you their ideas and thoughts. They were very
Mm.
respectful. And so
It was
as I
packaged
look,
better.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Very much like trying to present you the ideas. And I think everyone's kind of different. Some people you need to kind of be harsh with. And
Absolutely.
then other people, they're willing to have nice conversations, but you just kind of have to, get a gauge on who they are, kind of thing, because
Mm-hmm.
everyone's different in that regard with our personality types. So when I had listened to specifically John Steingard, who used to be a Christian musician, and then he left Christianity. And then I was listening to Apologia, and they talked about the Bible, and they were like talking about things that I never heard of. And one of the things that really threw me off was when John Steingard's like, yeah, did you know that the ending of Mark and the adulterous woman passage in the Gospel of John shouldn't be in the Bible? And in the back of my mind, I was like, what do you mean those shouldn't be in the Bible? Of
Mm-hmm.
course those should be in the Bible. because I didn't realize it at the time. I had this theology that's called dictation theory, where basically every word, every character in the Bible is 1000% protected by God. That you may not always understand it, but like, rest assured, this is God's word and it's unchanging, just like God is. Like, if God doesn't change, his word won't change. And so when I go to look up the textual criticism of how some of our earliest manuscripts do not contain those passages, it shocked me. I was like, what? That based on the, because like I had always been rest assured by the apologists that textual criticism gives us confidence that the Bible is secure. We don't need to worry about what's in the Bible as true or not, because we've got so many manuscripts. And then I was like, but we've got manuscripts hundreds of years earlier before our later ones that add these verses, and they don't have them. Why do we have these in the Bible?
Right.
And so I immediately started to bring this up to my other Christians immediately.
Wow,
And
good for you.
well, I had always understood as a Christian at the time that we have the truth and we don't need to, there's nothing to worry about, kind of thing. It's the atheists that are trying to come up with excuses or whatever. And anyone else didn't exist to me. Like, I never considered a world with Muslims or Mormons. I was always
NPCs.
Right.
yeah, I never like thought about other worldviews until later on here. But so I bring this up to my friend, some of my friends, and the responses were shocking. They weren't wanting to talk about, hey, Kevlar, let's talk about this. Let's look at this data together to see what you're talking about. It was, let's talk about me. And I was like, what about me? Like, I'm bringing you this. Doesn't this bother you? What's going on here? Why don't you get upset by this? Like, because I was always taught that when we look at stuff growing up in the church, it's like, okay, if this is what the Bible says and you don't like it, that's you, you're the problem. You have to change yourself for God, because this is God's word. And when I would see that the Bible had been edited, that told me that there were scribes who, and it wasn't just like grammar mistakes, these were like whole verses. That means they are editing God's word. And it puts it into question that they may go, I don't like this part in the Bible, therefore I'm going to put this in the Bible. And I was always taught that was bad, and yet scribes were doing this. And I remember even telling my friend, like, why wouldn't the Holy Ghost stop the scribe from doing that when they were copying that? God shouldn't have allowed this to happen to his word, kind of thing.
Right, absolutely.
Right? Like, it was just like, it didn't make sense. And so one of my friends, and so he would always try to be like, well, maybe we do have manuscripts, but we just don't have them or whatever. And I don't, as I look back on that question now, I kind of think that he was just saying whatever he could to see what would stick with me. It felt like he was just trying to keep me manipulated into the faith.
Yeah, but what if it was also a manipulation of himself too? Because you were
that could be
asking
another
good
thing.
questions, and it was like, okay, well, how can I reason this? Like that apologetic thing.
Yeah, it's like, this is my conclusion, and I can't back away from that. So how do I make this fit? Right? And no, that's a good point. Yeah, like he could have definitely been doing that for sure. And thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my other friend was like, and this is where I started to tell people, this is when deconstruction started to get a little popular, a little more popular around the time of COVID. And this is when I was like, okay, I need to look into this and not necessarily walk away from the faith, but I need to like see what it is we're dealing with here. And my one friend, I will never forget this. He said, it's okay to ask questions about this, but just only seek answers from people that already believe what we believe.
Yeah, see.
And at the time, I didn't know, that sounded off, but I couldn't articulate why. And the better way to explain it is, I was in the Assemblies of God branch of Christianity. Yeah. And so we always looked at Jehovah's Witnesses and Latter-day Saints as cults, right? That was just that. I didn't know what a definition of a cult was, but we just said they're cults. That's what I was taught, so it must be true. And I always thought to myself, imagine if there was like a Latter-day Saints member or Jehovah's Witnesses member saying, hey, I got questions about this. And their followers said, it's okay to have questions, just only seek answers from people who already believe what we would believe. We're like, yeah, that's information control, right? In other words, you should be willing and free to research it from both sides, and it shouldn't matter. Like, you should be willing to research both sides, right?
The truth should hold no matter what.
Exactly. So I go to do a forensics of my faith in the Bible and try to figure out what's going on here. Because to me, it was just, I think it was a combination of just, I had too many issues popping up and not understanding. I never was recognizing how important it is that I should be willing to ask these questions. I shouldn't just be this, you're going to burn in hell kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I go to research, I immediately found problems like Markan priority theory, which bothered me immediately because I was always taught that the Gospels were written independent of each other and they were independent sources of Jesus Christ. So that makes it really likely that this happened in history because we don't have a lot of this for ancient sources.
Right.
Well, when I looked up Markan priority theory, it was like, no, they're copying off of each other.
Literally.
And
Yeah.
I was like, if you guys are eyewitnesses, what motivation do you have to copy another person's eyewitness account? You should
Right.
just give us your
Tell
information.
what you saw.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that bothered me immediately, that what we don't have is we don't have these stories that, or these witnesses that were taught to me by apologists that corroborated and didn't, and there wasn't collusion. We had the exact opposite. We had collusion, and you don't know why they're doing that, but they're doing it.
For that matter, they're not doing it well because there's several contradictions from one book to the other. So it's like, it would be one thing if, because, you know, there was a time between them. And so it would be one thing if, as the story goes on, because one of the problems is that it gets more and more detailed as it goes on with time. But you would think that the first account would be the one with the most detail. So that's one thing. But then as the details start coming in, and they start contradicting each other, it's like, not only did you cheat off of the person who turned theirs in before you, but you didn't even do it well, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wild.
And so I started to, that immediately bothered me. And again, one of my Christian friends who had been indoctrinated by the later apologetics of this stuff coming out, he's like, well, that doesn't really matter. And again, I couldn't articulate in the moment why it was so apparent that this was problematic. He was immediately just trying to stop me from thinking this is a concern, you know, because he was just like, oh, they're just copying it because they're trying to get the word out there. But it's like, no, dude, they're copying it and they're changing things like you said, and they're changing it for the, it's like, why would you do that?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
why are
If it was a
you
real story, why
like,
would you do that?
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Or
protected
why
by
not?
God, you know, like you had said at one point, this is protected by God. So if it says it must be true, kind of thing. And it's like, well,
Exactly.
what kind of all-powerful God would let his story get manipulated in that way?
100%. Yeah, like that was my first theory, was that back when I wasn't looking into this, I was like, oh, the Holy Ghost told them what to write down. And so when the Holy Ghost would give this information, he would make sure the information wouldn't contradict each other, right? And now I have to look at this as, well, okay, that's not really going on. It's just because one thing that would happen is when you engage with apologists, you really have to get to know who the apologist is before. You can't just assume they're all thinking the same way, right? Because like some apologists, for me growing up, it was like the Bible's the word of God. It has to be capital T truth from every smallest root. But then some apologists will say, they'll kind of switch gears and be like, well, no, there can be errors, just not on the big stuff, right? It's like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
okay, like, you know, so I started to look at the Gospels and see for myself if I think these are contradictions, because I'd always been brought up these issues by atheists in the past, but I'd always used the excuse of, well, you're taking it out of context. So I'm
Of
like, okay, well, let me
course.
read this for myself and see what I think, right? And I would say the big things I remember that stood out that were problematic for me were, one was the genealogies. Because it was like, okay, the genealogy, like Luke, if you take it a plain reading of the text, Luke is saying this is Joseph's genealogy. He's not saying Mary's. And it was even brought up by Dr. Bart Ehrman, who said this is Joseph and adopted Jesus. Jesus was born under Mary, so we shouldn't care about if Joseph was under the lineage of David. We should only care if Mary is.
Exactly.
Right? And I thought that was a good point, because if you're going to say it's okay for the Messiah to be adopted under the lineage of David, you can do that for anyone. You could just take anyone right now
Literally.
and say, we're just going to adopt you to those families and then make it fit. Right? And if a prophecy is able to be if people are able to get together and make and consciously force a prophecy to work, that's not how prophecy works.
Right.
And so when these guys are giving us this contradiction, we don't know where their information's coming from, but we know they contradict. And when I would see apologists try to dance around, like maybe Joseph's mom remarried another guy who was also coincidentally under the lineage of David. And I'm like, well, that's possible, but that's not likely. Like you're trying to,
Make
you're
it fit.
starting
And
with,
why not just say that? Like, why not just say that this is what's going on?
Right.
yeah, exactly. That was
Especially if we know that those bloodlines mean something to those people.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, to me, that was like very frustrating. Another big contradiction was, where did the disciples meet resurrected Jesus? Was it at Galilee, as Matthew states, or Jerusalem, as Luke states? This to me was such a big one for me at the time. To me, it was like that. This was like so problematic at the time, because I had always agreed with, when I would hear apologists later on say, "Oh, it's like eyewitnesses reporting a car accident. They're not going to get every detail right, but the big stuff are going to be correct." Well, this is an instance where
It's a big
you have one
thing.
eyewitness reporting a car accident in one town and then another reporting in another town.
Exactly. This is a pretty big thing. This is a
Yeah.
big, inconsistency. And you know what? To that very point, a big one for me, which may not really necessarily be a big, no, but you know what it is? Who found the empty tomb?
Oh,
Why is that one that varies? You know, like that's a pretty big part of the
that's
story.
a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. Why does it vary? You know?
I can't even remember, who was it that it says they found first. Who was it again? Like, was it just like the ladies or one lady or something?
Yeah,
or?
I think at one point it was Mary Magdalene. And then I think at another point it was Mary Magdalene and someone else, maybe Mother Mary. And then I think there's. Hi, this is Tahir with an editor's note. So it sounds like there are 4 total gospel accounts of the empty tomb, and they go as follows. Matthew 28, 1 through 8 says that 2 women, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, went to visit the tomb. There was an earthquake, an angel came down from heaven, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. Mark 16, 1 through 8 says that when 3 women, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, and Salome, went to visit the tomb, they saw the stone already rolled away. They entered the tomb, saw a young man who told them Jesus was risen, and they should go tell the disciples and Peter. They left and told no one this because they were afraid. Luke 24, 1 through 12 says that when a group of women, including Mary Magdalene, another Mary, and Joanna, went to visit the tomb, they saw the stone already rolled away, entered the tomb, and saw 2 men in shining garments who explained that Jesus was risen. When they went to tell the apostles, Peter ran and looked inside, seeing only the linen cloths laid by themselves. John 20, 1 through 14 says that Mary Magdalene went alone to visit the tomb, but as she approached, she saw the stone rolled away. She ran back, apparently without entering the tomb, and told this to Peter and the disciple who Jesus loved. The 2 disciples both ran to the tomb and looked inside, but it was the beloved disciple who understood and believed. So, yeah, all of that to say, contradicting stories. And the question stands, why?
This story happened, these are contradictions that you wouldn't expect, right? So anyways, I'm starting to get these arguments in my head and learning about all of this, and my plan is to just kind of gather all of this that sticks out to me and present it to other apologists. But the last Yeah, just because, like, my impression at this point was that I had, like, to put this in perspective, I had thought I knew all the arguments against Christianity, which only succumb to the problem of evil. I was very naive. And I thought that, we know what's happening, we know what's going on, we just got to get the truth out there. And all that's going on is that people just don't understand these points. Well, I didn't realize how little I didn't know, because I had always trusted the apologists to relay information, because they would always say, look at how ridiculous these people are. They think we came from monkeys or whatever, right? And so when you only hear, I never understood the concept of, if you only let people speak for others, you're going to get a very like dialed down, smeared view of what they actually stand for, kind of thing, right? I'd always been like, okay, like they're telling me not to waste my time with it, so I don't need to worry.
Right.
And so I'm taking all this stuff and gathering all this information,
and then
getting ready to.
It's almost like you're writing a paper in a way. You're gathering all of this information, you're compiling it, you're
Yes.
sitting with it, and then when you feel like you've got it together, you're finished, you give it to someone to proofread, and it seems like you're at a point where you're ready to be honest with yourself enough that if you are giving this paper to be proofread and what is being told to you doesn't go with like what we're taught English is, for one, like words don't mean words, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then also like what's being said doesn't make sense, it's not a good apologetic. It's almost like you're getting ready to have your information tested and determine whether the answers are suitable or not.
Yes, exactly. I was like, we had all the answers as Christians, and when I saw how like shot this was against it, I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking there must be so many people who don't understand what's going on here. And I didn't like how there was such a huge disconnect between scholarship and what was going on at the church pews.
Yeah.
Right? Because like I'd always heard that message so
That's a
many
good
times
point.
about the woman getting stoned or Jesus not allowing the stone to hit her. And I'm like, if that didn't happen, does it not matter to you guys? Right? I'd always heard that sermon so many times, and yet God allowed this lie to be spread throughout his whole house, right? And so I was like, okay, let's get this information out there. But I never was, and I think it's just me and at the time thinking I'm not understanding how interconnected religion kind of is for people until later on when I started to feel it, right? I didn't understand what this means for some people if this isn't true. Like I didn't understand how like some people
need it.
They almost kind of need this. Yeah, they need this lie to be true, even if it is false, right? So I'm gathering this information and gathering all these points, thinking that when I engage with any Christian and every Christian, because we're taught to be honest, that when I present this to them, they're going to be like, well, we're all honest, so let's be honest with this or whatever, right? And as I go and, like I remember bringing this up to my friend, how I was bringing up, there are scholars that think that not all the books are written by Paul that are attributed to him. And I'm thinking, like, if that's not true, should we not take those out, kind of thing? And he's like, well, I mean, on one hand, he's like, well, I'd want to see what their reasons are. But then on another, he says, well, the book of Revelation says we can't take away from the Bible, because if we take away from it, we're taking away from our salvation. And I'm like,
but you could add to it.
That was another part of my problem with the whole verses being added, like John 8 and the ending of Mark 16 was like, those scribes must have added under their punishment by God if they did that. But I remember thinking, like, clearly God's not doing anything about this. And later on, I told him the book of that author was saying that to him because he didn't know there was a book 300 years later going to be added into it called the Bible. He just was writing for his book. So I would go over these small arguments saying, like, we need to get organized as a church for all of this because this is problematic. We need to look into this.
But the thing is,
sorry?
I was just going to say, the thing about it is you're doing the same thing that I did, where you're like, these little things, but they're not little things when you think about it, or at least they shouldn't be. That's a pretty big deal, especially when in the doctrine, doesn't it say in the Bible, you're not supposed to add to the word of God?
Yeah, it says that in the book of Revelations. But what it was that author, like, you have to realize he was writing that in, like, I think first or second AD. And he was doing that because what would happen is people would take these books from early Christian literature and change stuff with it based on their theology. And so he started to say, oh, don't do that. If you do that in this book, God's going to hurt you, kind of thing, to try to stop them from doing that, right? Because that was a problem with what scribes were doing to the book. They're saying, I don't like this part of the gospel, or I don't like this part of the letter, so I'm going to change that, And clearly God wasn't taking the time to protect the word at all. He was just letting it spread out like wholesale, right? So I gather all this information, and probably the biggest one for me was the problem of animal suffering. About 8 years ago, I made the decision to go vegan.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I went vegan 8 years ago and, never looked back once I saw what we were doing to animals in the industry and I saw how much more
Yay.
efficient it was and all that. And so I had always understood, look, if I can change my actions for the greater good of like my community, my environment, my people, all that, I will do my part, right? I'm not going to be a superhero, but I'm going to be a person that I'm going to do my part on the boat, right? Kind of thing. And when someone brought up the problem of animal suffering, again, I never thought of this. I'd always understood that old Earth hypothesis or young Earth hypothesis, it's not a big deal. Like you could still be a Christian either way. You don't have to give up your faith. But the implication was under the old Earth hypothesis was that if all this animal suffering was going on before mankind had stepped on the earth, why you look at that when you look at animals suffering out in nature, it's like that in my mind intuitively is evil. Like that's wrong, right? You can ask me all day, where do I get my morals from? But I intuitively am saying that is evil. Like I don't see anyone wanting to take a 2x4 and hitting an animal with it, right? And so why is God, sin hadn't entered in creation yet. Why is all this evil taking place? That's like such a problem if you believe in the old Earth hypothesis. And one of the Christians, when I was bringing this up to you, she's like, oh yeah, no, you're right, Kevlar. That's why we're young Earth creationists. That's why I am, because in young Earth creationism, you're totally right. There was no death before sin entered creation and all that. And I was like, okay, but here's the other problem that you guys have is if we're under a young Earth hypothesis, and when God made all the animals and Adam and Eve, and I said, you don't believe in evolution, right? And she's like, yeah, we don't believe in evolution. I was like, okay, why would God give tigers like claws and sharp teeth? Why would he give the Komodo dragon venom? It's almost like these animals were designed like God's like, okay, I know Adam and Eve's not going to sin, but just in case these animals are going to be ready to kill.
Freaking
It's like he was
mosquitoes,
set. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, like, why mosquitoes? Why are they the way they are?
Yeah, like why are you creating these animals like they're out to fight each other and kill
us.
each other? It's like you would have to say as a young Earth that once Adam and Eve sinned, and I guess when they got off of Noah's Ark or whatever, that they just had this rampant rate of evolution that mysteriously just stopped for a certain amount of period of time without any explanation. And people would always bring up, why not make it where we all just photosynthesize? And I was like shocked because these were questions that were coming up. Like people would ask, why doesn't Jesus just reveal himself like he did Paul? That also bothered me because it was like, I was always taught as a Christian, you will see these signs and wonders. You will see these miracles once you believe. If you don't believe, you'll never see it. And I was like, Paul never believed though. He got it before believing. And so I got all these questions lined up. And one of the things I'll share with people is that my deconstruction lasted 4 years. But once I probably got all these arguments for sure within maybe a bulk of them within the first 6 to 7 months of researching.
Wow.
And then the last 2 to 3 years were me running the arguments through my head over and over and over, trying to find a way
To make sense
to
of it.
make this work and fit, and constantly coming up short. Because, one of the things for me was, again, I didn't know the implications of what this meant for society if this was false. Like I never, when Christians reference Friedrich Nietzsche on God is dead, I was always taught that atheists were excited. Yes, we get to party. There's no God. But I didn't realize that when Friedrich Nietzsche said that, he wasn't excited. He was very much afraid and scared for what is this going to mean for society? What is this going to mean for people when they wake up and realize there's no God at the end of all of this, right? I never understood the implications. And so I would go to these apologists. I would go to websites. I would talk to the scholars, the professionals, and explaining this to them. And it's almost the only way I know how to explain it to people is all it felt like to me was they had a script and they tried to give you that script. And if you didn't accept it, they would just say, it was like, you're the problem at the end
Yeah.
of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I was just like, man, I can't speak for you guys, but for me, it got to a point to where I said, look, I don't understand why some people buy into this. If you really think these are good points and you really are content with them, I guess go ahead and believe it. But to me, I would never tell someone who's like a Hindu or whatever that, oh, if this doesn't make sense to you, you're the problem. Like, I would try to find a way to explain it. I would try to, maybe I'm not presenting it to them properly, or maybe I'm not being cohesive with my wording.
Or
But I
work
would
with
never
them to
just
find an
assume.
answer. Don't just stop midway through.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm sitting here trying to, I'm just like, man, I don't understand this. Why are people, these are, all I can say is I am listening to both sides, the counter apologist and the apologist. And the counter apologist is just making so much more sense to me. And I don't know what to do about that. And so, and I remember there were many times, dozens of times, where I would cry out to God, weeping, saying, God, I really need you to show up right now because none of this is making sense.
Belief is waning.
Yeah,
Damn, that's
exactly.
raw.
Yeah, it was like such a tough thing, right? And it got to a point too, to where like with some of my friends, I was starting to pick up on this later on. And again, maybe it was just me like growing up late in this, but it was just like, you get the impression like, okay, based on people's reaction, this isn't going anywhere. And so I don't want to annoy my friends. So I just wouldn't talk to my real life friends about it. And I'd have to talk to people online about this. And there was just so many moments where I'm trying to, again, with my ADHD brain, my brain is racing with all of this, trying to figure this stuff out because it was just such a shocker for me. Right. And I think it took me forever in the years to do this. I wish someone kind of presented this to me earlier, because what I think was going on was, and this might be for some people, if you're kind of in that deconstruction phase where you're like, okay, I hear these arguments from the counter apologists and the arguments from these apologists, and I think the counter apologists are stronger, but I don't know what to do now. I just am in this middle ground. If you're in that position, usually what I would say is, it took me a while to get to a point to where I realized, okay, is it more important that I believe things that are true, or that I believe things that make me feel good? Right. And so when you ask yourself that question, now you've got direction. Now you've got a goal. Because the whole time, depending on which Christianity you're taught, I wasn't really taught to or encouraged to explore my own goals that much in terms of my destiny. It was always like, God's got these laid out for you. Right. And so once I said, okay, the goal is to believe in as many true things and as few false things. Okay, well, what does that mean? It means that if I think these arguments way better than those arguments, I'm going to have to eventually toss the faith, right? But the whole time I thought there were good answers. I just have to find them, right? And so once I had established that, okay, and again, it took me forever to get to that mentality of finding that goal, because the whole other time I'm like thinking, I got to be missing something. I don't know what to do. And it was like so depressing for me, because I was like, I don't know what to do about all this. Other than the fact that here I am stuck in this middle ground and I don't know what to do. And when you're a Christian, the Christians always try to tell you what outside atheists think. When you're in the church, you're always going to hear the testimony of Christians who were atheists and they came to the faith and they're like, oh, this is so much better. But you don't hear the other side of the stories, right? You have a selection bias going on. And so it was just me eventually having the courage to having to admit that maybe, yeah, like, I think I should walk away, and that if there is a God out there, he knows my heart. He knows I'm sincerely non-resistant to this, and he can reveal himself to me if he wants to. But until then, it's not my problem. Right. And and so then later on, I eventually found Justin from Deconstruction Zone. And then that's when I found out, oh, there's no prophecies fulfilled. And when I was already an atheist, a nail in the coffin at that point. Like I wasn't planning on coming back, but that just made it like 10 times more secure that this stuff's not true,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But I like that. It's almost kind of like you were giving yourself the permission to do almost kind of like a trial run. It's like I've been sitting with this for years and I'm not moving one way or the other, backwards or forward. So I need to just move forward. This is my decision. Like none of it makes sense. I can't reconcile it. So I'm just going to drop it. Maybe something will change. Who knows? But for now, I'm just going to drop it. And I think that
Yeah.
that's really brave, you know, to
Yeah.
even just take that initial step, because that's the thing. When we have these conversations with Christians and stuff, it's like a lot of the times, you know, we just want a concession. We just want you to say, okay, you know what? Maybe this doesn't make sense, you know, or like I've heard situations where it's like, just try it, go a week, say, okay, I'm going to put the beliefs down. I'm going to, you know, try these things that I'm afraid of and see like what happens. And, you know, sometimes they're even too afraid to do that. Just try it. And so I think the fact that you were willing to be honest with yourself enough to just at least put it to the side for now, good on you for sure.
It's one of those things too, like oftentimes I'll see people where they're kind of in that, and I know what that's like, where you're in that middle phase where you're like, dude, I don't know what is truth. This could be true, this could be false. And, you know, if you're someone that's in that situation, I always like to tell people, just make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that say, look, I don't have an agenda. If you want to believe this, whatever. If you don't want to believe this, you know, I just want you to make sure you're good, but also try to like take some steps of, okay, let's write down what are the things that are in favor of this, what are not in favor of this, and then just try to make sure you're not in a situation where you're too long in a situation where you're spinning your tires, right? Because if you're constantly spinning your tires on like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to make this decision, you need to, and it's tough, right? You do want to be graceful for yourself on one hand, but it's also like you got to, I don't know, you just got to like figure out
You need
how
to make a choice at some point. It's
Yeah.
like, be honest with yourself. That's what it is at the end of the day. If you are looking at this information, and if in your heart of hearts, your most honest conversation with yourself, if you're looking at it and you're like, this doesn't make sense, I can't reconcile this. No matter what I do, it does not track. I've talked to people, believers, I've talked to pastors, and I can't get a satisfying answer on this. Just maybe try what you did. Just set it to the side. Say, you know what? For now, I cannot believe this because I know that something is wrong, or I have found that it is not true, you know, and just kind of like you said, put it to the side, move forward and go from there. But at least you're moving. Like you said, you're not spinning out your tires anymore.
Exactly. Because the thing is like when, and it's frustrating with Christianity because they always try to make it out like this life means nothing or whatever. This life is like nothing. And it's like, that's not true. There's a lot of beauty in this life to have. There's a lot of good things to enjoy about it that you can find within yourself. Yes, we all have different levels of things to be grateful for. And that was like another thing that was difficult too, is I had to learn to grieve different.
Absolutely.
Like when you have those hard moments of injustices that occur to you, for me, it was always like when I'd go to pray, it was like I'd be like an ostrich with my problems. I would pray to God and then bury my head in the sand. And if I plopped my head out, if the problem went away, oh, God gets credit. And if it didn't, well, I just didn't have enough faith, right? So I'd be,
or it wasn't meant to be, or
exactly. And now I have to like face those problems head on. I have to accept the injustices, and I have to accept the fact that there's no God coming for me at this. I have to figure this out on my own. And as frustrating as that is, it's how it is though, right? Do I want to lie to myself, or do I want to be honest with it and accept that?
Yeah.
And it's just learning how to deal with life different in that case. And you just have to, it is a shift in all of that. But it always goes back to where if you're someone that's like, man, I'm really struggling with this because of the implications, it's like, but does truth matter to you? Or do you want, because I always tell people, I don't want to be the person that buys a lottery ticket and says, I hope this is the right one. I hope, like, you're those people. I don't want to be someone that's like desperate about this and make things like way more emotionally gravitas. It's so exhausting for me. And it's like, I just couldn't with stuff like that, you know?
I think something powerful that you said in those moments leading up to your walk away was that you took an inventory of what was around you in the form of people, the people you've been talking to, kind of find coherence or recognize the incoherence with what they were saying. You looked at the documents, so you did some research about what's been written about this, and you brought that forward, and then you had a system of interrogating the text, interrogating the arguments, but then you also did like an internal calibration where you did check in with yourself and you said, you know yourself to be someone that is searching for truth and trying to create meaning from the information that's available around you. And something really powerful that you said was, you said, if God is real, and if God is real, if God is real in the way that this text claims, then this God knows that, and that's going to be his problem.
Right.
Then it will be up to him to convince me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also a really powerful tool for anyone that's thinking about walking away, because that is the reality. Especially when you're doing the work, you are making the effort to try to meet this deity halfway. And if you know yourself to be someone that is trying to search for truth, then the reality is that if this God is as powerful as what is being claimed, then this God will find you and meet you where you are at. If you have a hard time walking away because you're afraid of how this God is going to react to you not walking away, then run.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and to add what you said, because like one of the things that we need to understand too is that you're going to have those friends that they're either extremely delusional or they're extremely lucky. Like when I go back to when I told you about the prophecies that I gave, some of them hit, some of them missed.
Mm-hmm.
If a lot more of them landed where that lady said, oh yeah, I did have a son, and yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly the word I needed to hear, or me and my girlfriend got married, I would think I'm more willing and ready and primed to make more excuses for the faith had that worked out between me and my girlfriend. And
Right.
so, imagine you're talking to someone and they are convinced that God answered all of their prayers.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't understand critical thinking or epistemology, there's almost not a single thing you could say to them that would ever lead them to be like, oh, yeah, God, this isn't true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're convinced that they're just following God right. And the only reason why someone's walking away from faith is they're just mad at God, or they weren't as faithful to God like I was, because
Mm-hmm.
I was faithful to God and he answered all my prayers. Clearly, if he didn't answer your prayers, it must have just meant you didn't have enough faith or whatever,
Right.
right? There's going to be people like that. And so if you're someone that's like, man, I just don't see eye to eye with these people. Some of them, it's almost impossible with them because they don't understand these principles. They don't understand how to like sift through the data.
And because at that point, so much of their life and their identity probably is so wrapped up in these beliefs that they have, allowed to take root over time, like I'm
Yes.
blessed, or the only reason this happened is because of God, or eventually to undermine that is to like undermine opinions that you've had of yourself and the world around you for how long, to what extent too, for that matter. Like how important was it to you that you believed this at any given time? And so, yeah, I mean, it really is. That's why it's so hard for so many people. There's so many different factors, so many sticking points that they just mentally either don't want to or just really can't at some point, feel like they can't anyway, because they naturally could, but they feel like they can't get over those things because of XYZ.
Yeah, and that was like something too, I think later on, was I just thought subconsciously in my mind that people were looking at this the way I was. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to recognize that everyone's just in different positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, if someone's got a job that's dependent on this,
Right.
they're going to probably be very motivated to make this work,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed, and then learning about the sunken cost fallacy and people who have
Yes.
dedicated so much of their time. I think about that one psychologist in the 20th century who wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails. I forgot his name, but when he went to a alien cult, just a random cult, that no one knew about.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this prophecy or prediction that this is when the aliens were going to come and attack the world or whatever, or the end of the world was coming. And when that day came and went, you would think, oh, okay, they're going to be like, oh, well, maybe this isn't true. We should move on with our lives. But no, they doubled down on it.
Yeah.
And the people that had invested like a lot of money into the cult or whatever, they were not as willing to just walk away because they didn't want to be embarrassed that they just wasted all of their resources into this or their time. And it's like, once you see how other cults play out, and basically what apologists have to say is, oh yeah, we understand that Christianity kind of started the way a cult typically does, but this is the true one. It's like, you know, and again, they won't necessarily word it like that way, but that's how it is. It's like,
Right.
this is what you wouldn't expect from a God. And so the thing too is like, sometimes you have to learn to move on without other people agreeing with
Coming
you.
with
And that
you.
was like another kind of difficult thing, was because I thought this was so painfully obvious. And again, you have to learn and recognize that not everyone's going to see it that way. They're just not. Like, I think back to myself 10 years ago when I was listening to the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. When they asked if anything would change your mind, the correct answer, like Bill Nye said, was evidence. But I didn't understand it at the time. I was like, nope, Ken Ham's right. Nothing can change our mind, right? And so there was no exact moment for me. It was just me having to slowly get there. It was me, like, I wasn't like some people were like, oh, okay, this isn't true, let's move on or whatever.
Yeah.
It was a process. It was me having to double check. It was me having to fact check. It was me having to make sure, because it was so ingrained into me that if you're wrong,
The
you're
stakes
going
are
to burn
high.
in hell forever.
That's it. Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, now where I'm at with my life is I'm getting therapy for my ADHD. I'm trying to learn how to anchor that. I'm trying to be graceful for myself, that even though I wish I would have done a lot of other things in life sooner, I've woken up early and not in my 60s or 70s.
Or
You
at
know, I've
all,
learned
for
to
that matter.
I've learned to appreciate, like, okay, do the best you can. And when you know better, do better. I did the best I could with what I could back then. And now that I know more, I get to do better now. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's learning to appreciate that. It's like, recognizing that life now, it's about creating beautiful moments, right? It's about trying to find way to brighten people's days. Maybe you write a poem to your lover, or if you like serving people. Like, I still like to serve people. I know that's like a big Christian-y thing, but it's something now I get to appreciate in me doing for people, not a spiritual gun to the back of my head saying, if I don't do this, I'm going to get shot. You know what I mean? It's like trying to learn to create these beautiful moments. Neil deGrasse Tyson, he talks about how there's so many combinations of people that there could have been, and yet here you are. You get to
Exactly.
enjoy this life. You get to, there's like that poetry that you have to kind of give yourself. And so I'm just learning how to do all of that right
Well,
now, right?
yeah,
I'm
because
learning.
it's a matter of appreciating what you have while
Yeah.
you have it. No matter what it is, these are the circumstances you were given. For all we know is the one shot we've got. So do what you can with what you've got and appreciate it. Enjoy, like you said, those small moments, the little things. I think that's one of the things about Christianity and the focus on the afterlife is they're like, well, what do you lose if, the Pascal's wager of it all? What do you lose if you did believe? And it's like, what you lose is the one life that you know for a fact that you have. You lost embracing everything you could have because you had rules put upon you by who knows who over history. That's the thing, is like, you do lose either way. But the thing is, you can choose to go with what you think you know because of imagination and what you've been told, or what you know and what you're experiencing. And that's this one tangible life that you have.
And if you're someone, like, generally speaking, if someone's asking that, well, what do you lose in life? Like, they're probably someone that already enjoys Christianity somewhat, or had a good time in the church.
Right.
Like, I wasn't a member of the LGBTQ plus, right? But if you're someone like that, it's like, this is horrible, right? This is like hard.
Yeah.
You have to get those thought crimes accused of you. And I mean, everyone can get those thought crimes of, like, when Jesus says, like, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, or if you hate your brother, and you have these moments. And it's like, when people say, well, what are you losing out on? It's like, this religion, it can still cost you a lot.
Yeah.
I remember always fantasizing about wanting to get martyred for the faith.
With your question about, well, what could you lose? What could you possibly lose for just believing? What we're seeing right now, just with the state of this country alone.
Yeah.
You lose your humanity.
Yeah.
You've lost it. It's gone.
Wow. You're
because
right.
you've sacrificed children, you've sacrificed the sick, you've sacrificed people that you have impoverished, you've created war, you've dropped bombs on people on the other side of the planet in the
Mhm.
name of this deity, in the
Mm-hmm.
name of this God.
Yep.
So, what is there to lose? Your humanity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that word humanity because that's what it
Mhm.
is ultimately. Whether or not you are an upstanding person, whether you are caring about the world and the people around you, that is compromised by religion just in the doctrine itself.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is when I look back on my journey, I wish it didn't have to take 4 years. I'm glad I went through the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell people, like, it's just going to take time for people, right? Like when I see people in these atheist live streams and these Christians making all the excuses in the world to protect their faith, and then you've got the few that are like, oh, okay, I see this. Those people that it's taken a while, it's probably going to take them a while to just walk through this because
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult. It
Yeah, it
is
is.
hard. No one has to necessarily walk out the way I did, where I go in front of apologists and have these conversations with them, kind of thing, expressing my issue, because that's like really difficult to do for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
depends on who
Yeah.
you are, but that takes time and effort and work, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have the resources together like the church does, or like the government assistance that they get with tax breaks. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like some of us are kind of in these grassroots areas that we have to work from,
Yeah.
because and it's just how it is. Again, it goes back to the whole, like, when people think to themselves, well, why would I want to be an atheist? That sounds so boring. It's like, then you're missing the point. It's
Yeah.
not that we want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why we set out to do this. And with some of
Wait,
them,
what do they mean it's boring? How are we boring and heathens at the same time?
Exactly. That's what I was
yeah,
That's
thinking.
a walking contradiction.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I've had to recognize that some of them are just, they're either following that script and
Mhm.
that's what they think. And so I've had to learn to accept the fact that I don't know if it's performative or if there's just bad epistemology, but it's just like I have to go with what I think is most likely. The fact that some of them can't appreciate that is shocking to me. Like when if a Christian was like, I don't necessarily agree, but I understand where you're coming from, that's almost the most I can ever ask for someone, is to just
Right.
critically assess and just hopefully you have some level of transparency where you can put yourself in my shoes. That's all I could ever ask. When people are just being a-holes about it, it's so annoying. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so, as unfortunate as this is, when I look at this all, there's a lot of stuff to still be grateful for. And I always like to try to find that healthy balance of like making sure I'm taking the time to be enjoying and grateful of the stuff, but then also recognizing we still got to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. We still got to
Right.
fight for these other things that just, we're regressing on, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
100%. Yeah.
no.
But I was just wanting to point out that we've got, especially where the state of where our country is right now, it feels like an uphill battle and that, we're outnumbered, but we have to keep going. You have to have those conversations no matter how painful they are, because it could be one person per stream, if you will, or per conversation maybe that you have in a day. It could be one person who you say something, you plant that seed and it blooms, and that's one more person. Versus if you were to not say anything, not have that conversation, or what have you, you never plant that seed. And then it's like you said, you need to think bigger, because if we go with the idea that this is the only tangible life that we have, then we know that there will be people coming after us. And if you really do care about humanity and people, you want
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that you're leaving behind you, a world where people may not have to ascribe to this religion or live their life, with these rules and these restrictions. If you put in that work to have the conversation with people that they may have with someone else, that ripple effect. But that's never going to happen, and that never could potentially happen if you don't have those conversations. So it's important. It really is.
Yeah, like, I think about my life. If I never took the time to listen to the counter apologetics, if I never took the time
Mm-hmm.
to listen to the opposing side, I know for me, I don't think there's any way I would have ever been able to walk away because I just wouldn't have had the tools or the resources that I needed to have to recognize and make that jump. Because like I said, I just didn't understand the importance or the power of critical thinking. I was just taught this is what it is. And the critical thinking, like, what's that? You don't need to do that. That's work, you know,
Right.
like works are bad. You have to have faith. So, yeah. So, and sometimes like I'll have it with my real life community too. But, you know, one thing I've learned is obviously you have to find the rhythm for that because some people, they just don't care. Or sometimes like, you know, the moment's not right. You got to find a right time and a wrong time to have these discussions with
For
people, right?
sure. Yeah. And different
You know,
degrees of the conversation too. It can't be a one size fits all, the same approach to everyone, because that doesn't work with anything, you know? So if you tell somebody what you believe and it becomes a point of conflict and talking to them about it will get you nowhere and you can recognize that, then let it go. You did that initial step, right? You laid that
yeah.
initial
And
groundwork.
it's like funny because again, back when I was like a Christian, I was always afraid to evangelize for the faith, mostly because I just felt like it was always such an uphill battle. Like I was like, why
Yeah.
is this so hard? I don't know what to say or whatever. When I became a counter apologist, it was like the easiest thing ever. Like I'm so confident in these responses. It's literally up to how the person responds on how we go with this. So
Yeah.
Because you're in a genuine conversation with a person.
Yeah. You
yeah,
can be
yeah,
honest.
exactly. Like there was always that in the back of my head. Okay, I'm having this conversation with this person. We're talking about this random stuff. Eventually, I'm gonna have to find a way to pin this back to the resurrection or to Christ. And how do I bring this to them without sounding weird or whatever? And it was like the hardest thing ever. Whereas now I just get to have a conversation with someone and everything's fine. It doesn't, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. So
It's less surface level for sure because you have that intellectual honesty instead of that dishonesty that is almost forced, honestly, into believers. Because if you don't have a certain level of dishonesty, then man, that dissonance, it'll get you. It really will.
I don't, yeah. And it's still like a mystery to me how people do it. Again, my mentality was when I had like heard some of these arguments, again, just to reiterate the point, it's like I saw the writing, to make a Bible reference, I saw the writing on the wall. It was like, this is it. The gig is up. It was like, okay,
Yeah.
we're joking, right? Like this isn't real. And to see people with straight faces say, no, this is it. It's like, it's hard to track what our minds do because again, our brains are good at deceiving ourselves. If you don't understand that, you're already behind
on the
on
back
this,
foot.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, I thought that they must know something that I don't know, that if I knew what they knew,
You'd
I
feel
would
the
be at
same way.
peace.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I kept trying to find that and kept coming up short over and over and over again when I just didn't recognize that, oh, they just have either a bad epistemology. They're not recognizing this as a problem. Like they've labeled this, words don't mean words. Like, yeah, we say this is a problem, but it's not. Well, I know it says this in the Bible, but I'm going to take it to mean this. Or I know we would say it's wrong to genocide children, but when God does it, well, because God's all
It's
just, therefore it's not a
okay.
problem, right? And
Yeah.
you know, when you don't recognize that we as humans are good at deceiving ourselves and not
Yeah.
having that humility, that's when faith without evidence is problematic because then you could just be deceiving yourself. And that's what you would say with any of these other religions, right?
Exactly. What I will say is I am glad that you were one of those people who was willing to, like you said, kind of humble yourself and also come to the realization that, wait a second, there's more here than meets the eye, and there's more critical thinking that I need to do and things that I need to be honest when I sit with. And for whatever reason that people may have for choosing not to do that, I am glad that you chose to do that and that you are where you are today, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of work. At first, it doesn't feel like it's worth it, but it is worth
Yes.
it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You reclaim your mind.
Like no longer do you have to worry anymore about like, why is this bad injustice thing happening? Do I not have enough faith? Is there something going on with the cosmic data? I don't have that fear. Or like if something is happening out in the news, I would always be a pastor to try, oh, the Bible talks about how the end times coming, the end times coming, the end times
Yeah.
is coming. And I'd
Yeah.
always be like, that would just make me be anxious because, like, am I ready? How
Right.
do I know? How do I know this? How do I know that? And I don't have that worry anymore because I've seen, like I said, behind the curtain, and it's just so painfully obvious. And then recognizing that, okay, some people, they just want to continue playing that game,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you just got to let them. On one hand, it can be very sad, but you just have to recognize, like, hey, that's just what people do. And
Yeah.
you don't want to waste too much time onto it, but you just got to recognize that's what some people are going to do. And you got to move on from that, right? That's what
Yeah.
they want to do. Go for it. So,
Yeah.
Or, hold them responsible for when they're causing harm.
Mhm.
yes, that's a good one.
We don't even have to engage your faith to let you know that you're being a piece of shit to some kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we can bypass that altogether if that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We don't need to believe in the doctrine to hold people accountable for their behavior, for their actions. And I think I hear that argument so often. How can you measure whether genociding the Amalekite babies were bad? You don't even have a moral framework. And it's just
Yeah.
Right.
like, bro, like what? Like,
Mhm.
what are we even doing right now? I don't
Yeah.
even have to believe in anything
Mm-hmm.
to make the case
That
that we
this is
shouldn't
not
be harming
good.
other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so frustrating. And like that's another thing too. Like if you don't know the magician tricks that these apologists will do, like they'll come up with these points thinking they have really good points. And when they sound confident, again, if you don't understand the framework of what's happening, you can fall into that. Oh, maybe they're onto something or whatever. But it's like, no, morality is calculated subjectively. Ancient people thought that was good and they just used God as an excuse for their atrocities. Right?
Exactly.
They weren't interested in what was good at all. It was just something
Mm.
that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like, they
Yeah.
didn't care if it was, you know what I mean? They just wanted to do this thing.
And needed
Yeah,
an
they just did it
excuse.
and then attached God to it later on.
Yeah.
Actions played out, and then when they're writing this down, they're like, okay, let me make this out into a story about
Yeah,
God.
how do we how do we not sound like a total piece of shit?
Right.
Yeah,
Because I
exactly.
mean, honestly, if you really do dive into the stories that are in the Bible, like one of the ones that comes to mind for me is the whole if your wife is unfaithful and sleeps with someone else, it's like stone them to death. But it's right
Yeah.
because God said to do it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like, be real, you were mad. Your wife cheated on you, so you wanted an excuse to kill her. And what better excuse than, well, God told me to do it, you know?
And the fact that some people just don't see it is just like,
And the fact that God was sitting up there watching her do all of that and didn't say shit. Like, you had to go and
Right.
find
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that one of the things that I take away from this episode the most is like, the apologetics is, I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody's not ready to admit or doesn't want to admit, there's an apologetic for everything, literally everything,
exactly.
you know?
When you listen to Latter-day Saints apologists or Muslim apologists, when I first would listen to them, I'm like, people take this seriously? They're a joke. And like that's the thing is in a vacuum, their arguments don't work because their arguments aren't for you. Their arguments aren't there to like battle you and say, look how great we are. All their arguments are to keep the people in their church buildings, in their religious buildings, in the building still. They're there to battle their followers from leaving. That's what apologetics is.
Yeah. Apologetics are basically people coming together, sitting down, looking at the issues that there are with the religion and the belief, and then thinking, okay, what can we use to justify this? What can we use to explain this away or to undermine it? Yeah, let's go with that. That is all that they are. So, of course, it's a shield to protect their beliefs, not to fight you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like if I was with a homicide detective and he would be like, all right, Omni, what do you think's going on here? We got this murderer, this person. And I'm like, well, have you considered that maybe a demon came in here and he'd probably look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, can you disprove it? That's totally like, and that's what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And
And
it's
then the judge goes,
so
guilty. The demon is
Right.
guilty.
And you're like, what demon? And they're like, well, you can't see it, but it's there. I feel it. You know? Like,
yeah, exactly.
it's madness. It really is.
Yeah, And all we can do is just present these ideas to people,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully they get it. And we have
Yeah.
to recognize, because like I do at the end of the day think that personal experience is such a powerful thing for people, because it was for me. When
Right.
I had my personal experiences and I was young and naive, it didn't matter what the atheist brought up to me. I was like, I know this is true because I've seen God move in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're someone that has a lot of those amazing personal experiences, it's like it depends on how that person weighs it out. It's not
Right.
impossible. It's just the probabilities are so low, right? They get really low at that point. And it's just how it is, you know? So
Yeah. Well, because it's like, what more real thing could we possibly have than our feeling, like real to us than our feelings, the way we
yeah.
feel about things. Anybody with depression or anxiety or like some kind of mental illness can understand that sometimes what you feel isn't necessarily congruent with reality, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that there's not chemicals and beliefs and
Exactly.
experiences and what have you that go into giving you that feeling.
And same with my ADHD. With my
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, emotional regulation isn't as easy to do
Mm-hmm.
compared to the average person. Some people, they don't have a problem with some of these small stuff, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
that big of an episode like it may be for me or whatever. And so having that God factor, and then especially when the church on those sessions are really driving your emotions, like just give it to God,
Mm-hmm.
lay everything down for God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't realize how, I don't want to say the church is playing you, but they're unintentionally playing your emotions.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like you said, you have the information, you do with it what you will, you give it to people, they'll do with it what they will. But at the end of the day, you've got to move forward one way or another, because staying in place is not going to benefit you in any way.
Exactly. It's not worth it. Move forward. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of beauty here.
Mm-hmm.
Just try it. You know, like if even some people have said, okay, God, just try being an atheist for a day and see what
Yes.
happens. And
Yes.
say, hey, God, if you're there, like show up or whatever. I've done
Mm-hmm.
everything I can. Try being an atheist for a couple of days or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
then take notes of what happens, critically assess,
Does
you
the
know.
world crumble? Does the sky fall? You
Yeah,
know,
you know,
what
it's like,
really happens?
well, I think they did a study. Oh, I can't remember. What is it? I think they did this with chimpanzees, where if a chimp would get on a ladder, they would hose the chimp. And
Mm,
then the chimp wouldn't want to get on the ladder because then you would get sprayed. And I
conditioning.
think as they rotated the chimps in and out, it got to a point to where when the chimp would try to climb the ladder, the other chimps would prevent that chimp from
Mm,
climbing the ladder, because they had learned through behavior that going on the ladder is bad, but they didn't know why,
wow.
because they never saw anyone get hosed down,
They were
right?
trained to believe it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And they've done studies, psychological studies like this with us as humans, where we learn how there's a thing called in group bias. You're out of your mind if you don't think you're vulnerable to that stuff.
Yes.
Even as atheists, it's not like that stuff goes
Mhm.
away with us.
Mm-hmm.
We are
Correct.
still vulnerable to all of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and being aware of that, being aware of your biases, you know, when you see that stuff, if you're not aware of it, like I said, you're already behind on that stuff.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad we had this
Yeah.
conversation. Mm-hmm.
no, I'm glad too. I really enjoyed it too. Thank you for listening and hearing my story. And I mean, we can go on and on, but like it's all good in the end. Like as
Yeah.
hard as it was in the beginning, I'm so glad I did it. So yeah.
I agree. And, you know, one more thing I was going to say before we move on is, again, I think I may have even said this before, but like if you are somebody that's, you know, late in life, you finally deconstruct and walk away from the religion, you may think to yourself, man, if only I had done this sooner. I wish I would have done this sooner. I would just encourage you to remind yourself, at least you did it at all, because some people never
Yes.
afford themselves that opportunity, and you did it, you know, and it may even be harder and harder and harder to do it with time. But at the end of the day, just give yourself the grace for having done it at all. Just wanted to say that. But
For sure. The unfortunate thing too is like when people deconstruct, when you deconstruct your faith, if you think that's all that it was just a faith and nothing else in
yes.
society, you're nuts. This
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of other implications than just belief. There's
Yes.
other things at weight here than just belief. If
Mm-hmm.
someone wants to believe in like some Xiphon god or whatever, and it literally, that's it. It's just, I just believe in Xiphon and there's no rules or whatever, then nobody cares. And who cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to sit there and enforce other people that they have to listen to this and that there's other rules and implications involved, well,
Mm-hmm.
now there's a lot more at stake
It's
here.
a problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that comes into play. And this is the unfortunate thing with us sometimes as humans, is the reality, unfortunately, is some of us, we don't learn unless we feel it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's people out there, they don't think they have to worry about their back until they feel that they have back problems, right?
Right.
And there's people, they're not going to be worried about LGBTQ plus rights if they're straight, and they're never going to know it's a problem because they
Right.
don't ever have to deal with the crap with it, right?
Mm-hmm. If you lean into the privileges that you have instead of being big enough to step outside of them and see what other people experience and what it's like for other people, then yeah, you're only going to go so far, whether you're deconstructing religion or you're in the religion. And yeah, like you said, that's one of the things that we've even said before on our show, is like how important it is that you don't stop at like walking away from the religion. You keep going. You have to disassemble all the indoctrination, all the things that are ingrained into you to think and believe, to be, like you're for your humanity, like we said before,
No, for sure, for sure. It was a big deal when I realized, oh my gosh, morality doesn't come from God, it comes from us.
Mm-hmm.
That's a responsibility that I took at that point. I was like, this is important, right?
Yeah.
Like, how we craft our morality. Like, do we want to live in a world where we're just kill or be killed? No, this matters, right? Like, you have to craft this stuff. And if some people, it's really frustrating when other people don't take the initiative or the care that they should, because their vote matters. Not just vote in terms of politics, but vote in society, vote in their
what we're gonna
atmosphere,
allow, what
participation.
Yes,
exactly, wherever they're at, and getting involved in their vote matters.
Yeah.
And if you don't recognize that, it's just, I don't know, like,
They do see it, but the indoctrination doesn't cultivate empathy.
Right.
And they haven't been taught how to care. They haven't been taught that they need to care about this, and they haven't been taught how to care about it.
or
And
they haven't
so
taken the time to listen and understand,
Yes.
yeah, that's the empathy
Yeah.
or lack thereof.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I never thought of it like that, but yeah, that is empathy. Yeah.
And it goes to our point of, that's why you have to keep going, because just walking away from the religion does not address that lack of empathy that is essentially taught to you via the religion. So, yeah.
You still have to reclaim your humanity.
Exactly.
That's a whole separate process.
I love that. I really love the humanity aspect that we've touched on here. That was, yeah, that's definitely a great thing to carry with us, having this conversation. And for those listening, your humanity matters. Make decisions and choices that lean into your humanity and humanity of everyone around you. At the end of the day, that's empathy, that's care, and that's what is going to make the lives better of not just you, but everyone around you. And look at our country, where we're at right now. If that's not a sign that we as a country need to work on our empathy, then I don't know what else is.
Because it's like when people are making big decisions on a god, it's like, if that's not true, this matters. We've got to recognize it.
Yeah,
It is.
exactly. All of that being said,
Yeah.
I think at this point we're kind of ready to move into the part of the conversation where we talk a little bit more about the reconstruction process. So we walked through deconstructing the religion to where you are. Now we kind of transition into the reconstruction of yourself, your, how you see the world today. And we've gotten a glimpse of that, I think, which has been really nice. But I do have some questions that we like to ask just to zero in on this aspect of things.
What are you most proud about?
Probably the fact that I've done a lot of work and therapy on just being kind to myself, being kind to others around me, trying to be better with my words, and then just learning to appreciate my life. And so it's just like the fact that I self-reflect on my growth, and the fact that I get to show up and enjoy the life that I have is what it is.
Yeah, you should be proud of that. Absolutely. Kind of going back to what we were saying previously, not everybody does that or gets the chance to do that. So, yeah.
Like you have to reflect on that stuff. There's a good saying where it's like you have two lives. The first life is you being born, and then the second life is when you realize you're going to die, right? That's when your second life starts. And so learning to be like, okay, I've got all this life ahead of me. How do I want to spend it? How do I want to appreciate it? And you get to decide that. That's a beautiful thing. You don't need to worry anymore about what someone else thinks. The church is going to say, this is what you will like, but now you get to decide that for yourself, right? And it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You are you. You get to know that. And learning to take the time to learn more about that about me is exciting. It's something I never did enough of when I was a Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm excited for you.
What's the next question?
And I think we did kind of touch on this a little bit, but I'll just ask, what internal changes have you observed since deconstructing?
Probably just how, obviously the big one is just now recognizing, like, when I had those positive euphoric feelings, that's not God, that's just us being humans.
Yeah.
And then just recognizing again, you can still do this as a Christian, but just recognizing our cognitive biases and how we can be vulnerable to them. And you just got to learn that about yourself, right? And just be aware of that stuff. So I would just say, like, that would be it. Yeah, those things.
Okay. I agree with you completely.
What do you want to learn?
There's like a part of me that is still exploring that. I do like learning about finances. I do like learning about psychology. I do like learning about history and people. When I was growing up, I remember not caring a flip at all about history because I'm like, well, who cares about our history? Like, that's happened in the past. Let's live life now. And it wasn't until later on when I really understood the idea that history repeats itself. And how we can, if we're not careful, we can regress on things. I then realized how important it is to know our history.
Yeah.
Like learning about the Civil War and how that was over the Bible in regards to slavery at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And learning that and not realizing that from the church, that information was kind of, let's just dust that under the rug or whatever. And if you don't recognize, sorry, I'm just kind of like jumping around here, but like those are some of the ideas that I want to learn more about us, I think, as humans. So yeah.
No, I love that. Especially with the backdrop of what's going on today. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, I think if you look at history and you look at what happened leading up to the Holocaust and what happened during the Holocaust, if you can't look at that and then look at what's happening in our country right now and see how similar it is, then, I don't know what to tell you, because that is the perfect example of why everyone needs to be familiar with history, like they say, to prevent it from happening again. So I love that.
Exactly. If you're just going to allow people to speak excuses and say, no, that's not happening, or da 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 da, and talk down to that,
That's not what it
that's what
means.
they did with slavery in the Civil War. That's what the games that the Confederates were doing.
Yep.
Totally agree. So who or what inspires you?
I would say probably Warren Buffett. I would say like, there's that one, I got to look him up now. He just came up. I would say definitely Justin from Deconstruction Zone 2, I would say. He inspires me.
Yay, Justin.
There's that one, I got to look him up now. He just came up.
But really quickly, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I chuckled because I thought you said Jimmy Buffett. I didn't realize you said Warren Buffett. I was like, oh, wow, he likes Jimmy Buffett, huh?
No, James Talarico, I think is his name.
Oh, okay.
Do you know who that is? He's a young Democrat in Texas.
Oh.
And I just liked some of the messages he was speaking about how, like one of the really unfortunate things with this country is there's that disconnect between us and these politics.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying it's like the rich and us kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like
really.
when you have a goal and people are trying to accomplish things, again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just when you sacrifice your humanity for that goal is when things become problematic,
Yeah.
right? So it's like there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with wanting to be ambitious or whatever, but when you are dehumanizing people, things become problematic. And I
Yeah.
felt like he did such a great job of articulating that. Of it was just like a good reminder when I go out into society, like everyone matters to every degree. Like we're all here for each other. We've all got our problems. Let's try to figure this out together. And guess
For
what? We don't need a
sure.
God. We don't need to put our hands together and wait for God to come solve our problems. That's not going to help.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
That
I just
part. Mm-hmm.
in the question you asked, like I haven't really thought of it too, to be fair. Like I never, like that's a good question. And like some of this stuff I'm gonna like think more on too. Cause like I
Sure.
don't do a lot of that either. I'm still like in that learning who I am phase too. And so yeah.
Sure. I feel
But
that.
Mhm. What is your passion?
I would say right now, enjoy the ride. Don't worry about the goal, just enjoy the
Hey.
ride. You definitely have goals, but just learning to appreciate the moment now and
Mm-hmm.
not rush to things. It's still difficult because sometimes you definitely still have those tendencies. And so you try to find the balance, but just learning to just appreciate the journey of what I've got rather
Yeah.
than just always wanting, hey, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want this to happen. I want,
Mm-hmm.
so just learning to enjoy the journey.
I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. We should focus on that more.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the next question kind of ties into that. So, again, we may not really need to dive into this one too much, but I'll ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Where do you find joy?
I would say in just music.
Oh,
Honestly, sometimes listening to Justin's Deconstruction Zone or these other
aw.
atheist podcasts. I don't care what anyone says. It's a relief to hear from people what I've always thought when you're surrounded by people that say nuh-uh, nuh-uh all the time. I
Right.
don't care what anyone says. I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I exercise, that's another thing that helps a lot. And then yeah, like trying to do better at making sure I reach out to friends kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those are definitely like the moments like
Make you happy.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
I relate to that a lot.
What would you like to contribute to this community?
I would say I would like to at first right now because I'm still trying to figure out where I want to be career wise.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to eventually down the road. It's so inspirational when I see the community get together and help each other out financially. Like, I
Yeah.
love that stuff. I would love to be able to one day down the road get to where I can do that and do my part.
Aw.
But for right now, I would say what I'd like to be able to do is to just sometimes be there as a human to human for people
Oh, yeah.
who are going through this deconstruction journey. Like, if someone's having a hard time, don't feel like you have to make a sudden move now. Don't think you have to make anything urgent now. Just, it's okay to just breathe sometimes with someone. Like,
Yeah.
usually what I like to tell people if they're deconstructing is I'll say, look, I don't have an agenda. Whether you believe or not, I can just be here to talk. I
Mm-hmm.
can give you my 2 cents, my take of it. But if you just need someone to talk to, I'm more than happy to just do that as well.
Aw.
Because sometimes that's what people just need.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
I would just like sometimes what I would like to do for now is just, if someone needs like a chit chat or whatever, I'm more than happy to do that. Or just if they need like sometimes if they need help working with stuff or whatever, I can give them my 2 cents. But eventually down the road, I'd love to be able to help people out, when people have their issues to contribute financially for
Yeah.
stuff because hey, resources matter some for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, totally things that I can relate to. And, I think this might be a good opportunity to plug. If you're listening to this and you're a member of the Deconstruction Junction, I know there's a lot of channels. Things can get kind of lost in the mix, but I do really want to encourage, if not utilizing the mental health message board, it's a nice place to kind of journal, even offload some of what you're feeling, kind of putting it into the ether. And if you are looking to talk about what you're going through or how you're feeling, then that's also a great place for people who have the capacity and the ability to talk to people. Take a look through every now and again, see if somebody's looking for someone to talk to. If you have some time, maybe give it a shot. So it's one of those things that it could be multifunctional. So I just wanted to plug that. And then we also have in the Discord the discussion lobby. It's not so much a debate space as it is questions you may have, people can answer for you, or it's a little bit more of like a discussion space compared to like a normal chatting space like we have with the Heathens general chat. So I really encourage you to look through the channels, really see what it is that's in there and what they offer, because there is so much in the Discord that can be beneficial to our community. I know we're just a little bit intimidated sometimes to really dive into it. So, and if you need help, feel free to reach out. We've got mods and admins, and there's Discord help. So I just wanted to take a moment to encourage everybody to really see what the community and the Discord can do for you. And on that note, the next question actually is, what do you hope to receive from this community?
Honestly, just the fact that there are other people who think like me, it's nice to have that. Like I said, when I was in an atmosphere for so long where it felt like people were being performative.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I can be around other people that are like, hey, you're not crazy, you're not losing yourself, you're not losing your mind. The fact that there are other people like that I don't know, there's just like something relieving about that.
Oh, yeah.
It's just nice to have something like that where you don't need to like worry about that stuff, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to kind of describe.
No, I totally get what you mean.
A sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And also, when you're surrounded by so many things that don't make sense or people who don't want to engage in truth and fact, it is nice to look around and be surrounded by people who do, So I totally feel that.
All right, Omni, is there anything else you wanted to share with us before we go?
I guess like one question, what's the one thing that you think people deconstructing are just missing on? Like what's one thing that you're like, man, the big thing that I constantly see coming up, this is what, if they just had this tool or this thing, or like, is there anything that you can point to where you're like, this is what deconstructioners are not doing correctly, or maybe not? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I would say for me, and I guess it depends a little bit on what we're talking about specifically, like in the reconstruction part or the deconstruction part. But one of the things that I think is far too common in the faith or out of the faith is not knowing the history of the religion, how it was formed, what scholars say, like all of that stuff, I think is so important, because if you're in the religion, then those are some of the things that you cannot argue with. And if you're not in the religion, then you're educated on and you can use as a shield, as you proceed to work through your deconstruction process. So that's something that I would encourage everyone to do. And to that point, I do this a lot, but I'm going to plug Christ Before Jesus, their book. That was that for me. I learned so many things that I never knew and that I don't know that I would have ever learned in any other context. And, it was something that really helped further my deconstruction process, that whole knowledge and history and all that. So I would say that.
No, that's so important because, what I always tell people is like, for me, like when I go back to my thinking, like, am I often missing stuff? Those intellectual arguments are what I'd always go back to. And so while I was struggling emotionally with all of this, the evidence, the points, the rock solid cases, that's what I always had to keep going back to, because I was like, no, I'm not crazy because of this, this, and this. And even though I had to go through that hundreds or thousands of times for it to finally click, it's like, yeah, when you have those points, I understand some people, they just leave because they're quote unquote mad at God, if you will. But it's like, if you take the time to look at these arguments and points, you'll realize, oh, there's actually a lot more there's a lot more problems than this, than just, oh, there's like God's harmful,
For sure. Absolutely. What about you, Garnet?
For me, it would definitely be ableism. I think that's something that still really needs to be unpacked in the deconstruction community. And it's starting to get to a point where There is so much going on right now in the country. I mean, with everything on all fronts.
Mm-hmm.
But the language of eugenics, ableism is
Mhm.
the language of eugenics. And I really feel strongly that focusing in on unpacking that and being very intentional with the way that we word things, with the way that we phrase things, especially when we're frustrated.
Yeah.
I think that is going to really help our community be more inclusive
Mm-hmm.
and be a safe place for people to continue to deconstruct,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Yeah.
neurodivergent people coming to accept diagnoses about themselves that they weren't allowed to accept
Right.
while they
Yeah.
were practicing whatever religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's something that I've talked about in other kinds of spaces and I've talked about here, but that's something that I'm really hoping to see more of from the deconstruction community.
I agree. I do agree. Especially, as we have these conversations with believers, whether you're a content creator or not, it is. I mean, when you attack somebody's intelligence in these conversations, it doesn't further the conversation, for one, but for two, that undermines a lot of the other reasons why they're feeling the way that they're feeling or saying what they're saying. And sometimes it's not a lack of intellect at all. And so,
Hmm.
when we start using words, that attack somebody's mental capacity or their level of intelligence, or, when we start calling people slow, like that kind of thing, that does bother me a lot. And then
But
you
yeah,
have the you're crazy of it all. And yeah, go ahead.
well, it
Yeah.
makes me think back to when I brought up my issues with my friends about like, hey, I'm having struggle. Like, why were these verses taken out?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than talking about the data or explaining things to me, it was just they wanted to talk about me. And it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about that. Like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
want me to do? I can't do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like I'm trying
Yeah.
my best. Maybe I'm having a hard time learning. I do have ADHD. Things take me a while. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe
Mhm.
you're not explaining it well, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be this thing that you just waste everyone's time by getting frustrated or like mocking people over. It's just that doesn't
Exactly.
help anyone, you know?
Exactly. Yeah,
Well, and
100%.
I think frustration can be okay, and it's to be
Sure, sure.
expected because we're human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure,
But
sure, sure. Yeah.
it really is like learning how to sit with what you're feeling when you're feeling it, being
Mhm.
okay with this is just my limit, this is just my bandwidth,
Mm-hmm.
and really thinking about a lot of the words that I often hear used to describe Christians. First of all, a lot of those words used to be used in clinical settings to describe usually cognitive disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that most of those people really aren't in the room with us right now. So you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
people like there's people that aren't even online right now catching strays for no
Mm-hmm.
reason. And then second of all, it doesn't actually describe what's happening. It doesn't
Right.
actually describe what's going on. If you're getting frustrated because they're lying and they're being disingenuous, then call out what is actually occurring. Using these other kinds of words, it doesn't equip our community to correctly identify the behavior that is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
What's problematic is gaslighting,
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
people with low IQ.
Mm-hmm.
People with low IQ have that has nothing to do with what's happening right
Mm-hmm.
now. It's irrelevant.
Is that
Yeah.
what people are
It's
saying?
Yeah.
well, these are things that I'm hearing
Oh,
just
okay.
as a whole. These are
Yeah.
things that I'm hearing just as a whole. And I have heard other kinds of phrasings, slow and eating crayons and, even terms like crazy, and
Mm-hmm.
insane. These things that are so normalized, they really do etch away at our own integrity,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we are trying to explain how we know how to be inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
when we are
Mhm.
trying to build sustainable communities that are inclusive and accepting of people in all of their shades and all of their forms, and that includes neurodivergence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, equipping us, especially those of us who grew up being indoctrinated, grew up denying science, denying reality. We're already coming out of being self deluded, being communally deluded, right? The family's deluded, the community is self deluding itself.
Mm-hmm.
We're already coming out of that. The most important thing that I feel content creators can do with their platforms is to use language in a way that equips people to recognize what is actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
This is gaslighting. This is what a straw man is. This is steel manning the argument. This,
Yeah.
name what it is. Name what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Saying someone's an idiot, that doesn't describe what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
They're being
Mm,
willfully dense.
Mm-hmm.
They're being
yeah.
presented with information and they are choosing to believe something else because of cognitive dissonance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Equip people with the knowledge to recognize what the behavior is and what are the source of the problem.
Yeah,
That's really good.
100%.
Yeah.
I agree with you fully.
That was my only question for
Okay.
you. But thanks again for having me. This was
Of
a lot of fun. I
course.
hope that there's more perspective that could be added on this. Like, again, like, even though I'm a white, straight, cis male who has ADHD,
Aw.
I always like to tell people everyone has their story, everyone
Yes.
matters. We need everyone's perspective
Mm-hmm.
here. And I just hope that people recognize that it's okay to just be in that, oh, what's going to happen mindset.
Yeah.
But even if I have to make one step, just something, like, we gotta,
Mm-hmm.
like, figure something out here. And it's a combination of being graceful with yourself too,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a process. Everything is a process and a learning curve. And there are some
Mm-hmm.
things that we're just going to be really good at and we're going to pick it up and, take it with stride. And then there are some things that are just
Mm-hmm.
going to be a struggle. That's
Mm-hmm.
just the
Yeah,
reality of
and that's
being
okay.
human.
It
Mhm.
happens.
What's important is that we do our best.
Yes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's all, folks. Once again, a big thank you to Omni for sharing your story with us today. It
Thank
truly has
you.
been a
Yay.
pleasure having you. If you're still listening, thank you for being here with us today. Once more, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share with us your thoughts on today's episode below. We would love to hear from you.
If you're interested in sharing your story with us, please send us an email to shattered.foundations, the number one, shattered.foundations1@gmail.com, and we will gladly get back to you.
Catch you next time for another episode of Shattered Foundations Reconstructed Self. Bye.
Bye.